Watch the Muslim man kneeling in prayer outside this church. His name is Maz. He's completing morning prayers to Allah on Christmas Day. Then brilliant sunlight breaks through clouds, focusing directly on him, changing everything forever.
My name is Maz. I'm 28 years old, and what happened on December 25th, 2023 shattered everything I believed. I was a devout Muslim who had never questioned my faith until that Christmas morning. I thought I was just completing my daily prayers. I had no idea Jesus was about to intervene. For months leading up to that Christmas day, something had been stirring in my soul that I couldn't understand or explain. It started with dreams that would wake me in the middle of the night, dreams so vivid they felt more real than my waking hours. In these dreams, I would see a man in brilliant white robes walking toward me across what looked like golden wheat fields. His face was always obscured by light, but his presence filled me with a peace I had never experienced in my 28 years of life. The first time I had this dream, I dismissed it completely. As a devout Muslim, I had been taught that such visions were either meaningless subconscious fantasies or worse, deceptions from Satan designed to lead believers away from the true path of Islam. I had memorized large portions of the Quran, prayed 5 times daily without fail, and followed every Islamic teaching my parents and Imam had instilled in me since childhood. These strange dreams had no place in my ordered, faithful life. But the dreams kept coming, night after night, each one more intense than the last. Sometimes the man in white would extend his hand toward me, and I would feel an overwhelming urge to reach back, but I always woke before our hands could touch. Other times, he would speak words I couldn't quite hear, but the sound of his voice would fill my entire being with warmth and love unlike anything I had ever known. The strangest part was that even though I couldn't make out his words, my heart somehow understood what he was trying to communicate. Every morning after these dreams, I would perform my ritual washing and kneel on my prayer rug facing Mecca, trying to push these visions from my mind. I would recite the familiar Arabic prayers I had known since childhood, seeking comfort in the rhythmic words that had always brought me peace. But something had changed. Where once I felt connection and spiritual fulfillment during prayer, now I felt only emptiness. It was as if I was speaking into a void, my words echoing back to me without reaching their intended destination. This emptiness terrified me more than the dreams themselves. I had built my entire identity around being a faithful Muslim. My relationship with Allah was the foundation of everything I believed about myself and my purpose in this world. To suddenly feel disconnected from that relationship shook me to my core. I began to question whether I was praying correctly, whether I had somehow offended Allah without realizing it, whether my faith was weaker than I had believed. In desperation, I scheduled a meeting with my Imam, a wise elderly man who had guided our mosque community for over 30 years. I described my dreams and my growing sense of spiritual emptiness, hoping he could provide clarity and restore my peace of mind. His response was exactly what I expected, but not what my heart needed to hear. "These visions are tests from Satan," he told me with grave concern. "The enemy knows you are a devout believer, so he is trying to confuse and mislead you. You must resist these deceptions through increased prayer, fasting, and devotion to Islamic teachings. Do not give these dreams any credence or power over your faith." I left that meeting determined to follow his advice. I increased my daily prayers from 5 to 7, adding extra supplications in the morning and evening. I began fasting twice a week instead of just during Ramadan. I spent hours each day reading and rereading the Quran, searching for verses that might strengthen my resolve and silence the doubts that seemed to grow stronger each day. But no matter how much I prayed, how often I fasted, or how diligently I studied Islamic texts, the emptiness persisted. In fact, it seemed to deepen with each passing week. The dreams continued with increasing frequency and intensity. Sometimes I would have the same dream 3 nights in a row, and I would wake with tears on my face, though I couldn't understand why I was crying. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever felt God calling you in a direction that terrified you? Have you ever experienced a pull towards something that contradicted everything you had been taught to believe? That was my reality during those months. Every fiber of my religious training told me to reject these experiences, to dismiss them as satanic deceptions, but my heart recognized something authentic and divine in them that I couldn't deny. I began to isolate myself from family and friends, afraid that they would see the internal struggle written on my face. My mother noticed that I seemed distracted and troubled, but when she asked what was wrong, I couldn't find words to explain what I was experiencing. How could I tell my devout Muslim parents that I was having dreams about a figure who seemed suspiciously like the Christian Jesus they had taught me to view as merely a prophet, not the Son of God? The guilt of these thoughts was overwhelming. I felt like I was betraying not just my faith, but my family, my community, and my entire cultural identity. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound was trying to break through into my life, something that demanded my attention and response. As Christmas approached that year, the dreams intensified. The man in white began appearing not just at night, but in quiet moments during the day. I would be walking down the street and suddenly sense his presence nearby. I would be at work and feel an inexplicable warmth wash over me, as if loving arms were embracing me. These experiences left me both comforted and deeply unsettled. Deep down, though I wasn't ready to admit it even to myself, I knew something was calling me toward a truth I wasn't prepared to face. The foundation of my Islamic faith was cracking, and I could feel myself standing on the edge of a precipice that would change everything about who I thought I was and what I believed about God. That Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, with heavy clouds hanging low over our neighborhood like a thick blanket. I had barely slept the night before because the dreams had been more intense than ever. This time, the man in white had been standing at what looked like a wooden door, his hand extended toward the handle as if he was waiting for permission to enter. When I woke at 5 in the morning, my heart was pounding, and I felt an urgency I couldn't explain. My original plan was simple and familiar. I would perform my morning ablutions, dress in my clean prayer clothes, and walk the 6 blocks to our mosque for Fajr prayer, just as I had done countless times before. This was my routine, my anchor in a world that had felt increasingly unstable over the past few months. I needed the comfort of familiar prayers, the reassurance of praying alongside other believers, and the peace that usually came from submitting myself to Allah in the pre-dawn darkness. I completed my ritual washing carefully, making sure every part of my body was clean according to Islamic law. I put on my white prayer clothes and grabbed my prayer cap, checking my reflection in the mirror to ensure I looked presentable for worship. As I stepped outside into the crisp December air, I could see my breath forming small clouds, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. The walk to the mosque was one I could make with my eyes closed. Turn right out of my apartment building, walk 3 blocks down Elm Street, turn left on Main, then continue straight until I reached the green dome that marked our place of worship. But as I walked that familiar route, something extraordinary began to happen. From somewhere ahead of me, carried on the cold morning air, came the most beautiful singing I had ever heard. It wasn't the call to prayer I was accustomed to hearing from our mosque. This was different. Harmonious voices were blending together in what sounded like celebration, joy radiating from every note. The melody was unfamiliar to me, but it stirred something deep in my chest, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through my entire being. I found myself slowing my pace, then stopping completely as I realized where the music was coming from. Grace Community Church, the large brick building on Maple Street that I passed every day on my way to and from work, was filled with light and life on this Christmas morning. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the warm glow of what must have been hundreds of candles, and the voices I was hearing belonged to their congregation celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. Everything in my Muslim training told me to keep walking, to ignore these Christian songs and focus on my own prayers to Allah. But something much stronger than my training was pulling me toward that church. My feet, seemingly of their own accord, turned off my usual route and began walking toward the source of that incredible music. With each step, the singing grew clearer and more beautiful, and my heart began beating faster. I stood on the sidewalk outside Grace Community Church, looking up at its tall wooden doors and the cross that adorned its steeple. The singing from inside was overwhelming now, voices raised in what I would later learn were Christmas carols celebrating the Savior's birth. Even though I didn't understand the words they were singing, the joy and worship in their voices was unmistakable. It was the kind of authentic praise I had been searching for in my own prayers, but had been unable to find. For several minutes, I just stood there listening, feeling torn between the pull I felt toward this place and the loyalty I owed to my Islamic faith. I thought about my parents, who had sacrificed so much to raise me as a faithful Muslim. I thought about my imam's warnings about Christian deceptions. I thought about the shame I would bring on my family if anyone saw me showing interest in a Christian church. But I also thought about the emptiness I had been feeling during my prayers, the dreams that wouldn't stop coming, and the growing sense that Allah was somehow distant from me no matter how devoutly I tried to worship Him. Standing outside that church, listening to voices raised in joyful praise, I felt more connected to the divine than I had in months. The internal struggle was intense. I couldn't bring myself to actually enter the church, as that would feel like a complete betrayal of everything I had been taught to believe. But I also couldn't force myself to walk away and continue to the mosque as if nothing had happened. The solution I settled on felt like a compromise that honored both my Islamic duty and the strange pull I was experiencing. I would complete my morning prayers right here on the sidewalk outside the church. I would fulfill my obligation to Allah while staying close to the source of that beautiful music that was stirring my soul in ways I couldn't understand. It seemed like the perfect middle ground between obedience and curiosity. I unrolled my prayer rug on the concrete sidewalk, positioning it carefully so I would be facing east toward Mecca, just as Islamic law required. The contrast was striking. There I was, a Muslim preparing for prayer outside a Christian church on their most holy day, with their joyful songs providing the soundtrack for my Islamic worship. As I knelt on my prayer rug and began the familiar Arabic words of Fajr prayer, I tried to focus entirely on my conversation with Allah. But the Christian hymns seemed to penetrate every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. Instead of being distracted or annoyed by their singing, I found myself inexplicably comforted by it. The voices seemed to be welcoming me, embracing me, calling me towards something I was afraid to name. I thought if I prayed loudly enough, if I recited my Arabic prayers with enough conviction and volume, I could somehow drown out those Christian songs that were penetrating my heart and confusing my mind. But the harder I tried to focus solely on my Islamic prayers, the more those hymns seemed to speak directly to my soul, answering questions I didn't even know I was asking. I was halfway through my second rak'ah, deeply focused on the rhythmic movements of Islamic prayer, when something extraordinary began to happen in the sky above me. The heavy grey clouds that had blanketed our city since dawn suddenly started to shift and part, as if invisible hands were gently pulling them apart like curtains being drawn back from a window. What emerged from behind those clouds wasn't the pale, weak sunlight typical of a December morning. This was something entirely different. Golden light began pouring down from the heavens with an intensity and warmth that defied every natural law I understood about winter weather. It wasn't the harsh, blinding light of looking directly into the sun. Instead, it was gentle yet powerful, warm yet not burning, focused yet all-encompassing. The most remarkable thing about this light was how precisely it seemed to target me. While the rest of the street remained under the grey overcast of normal December weather, this brilliant golden beam descended from the parted clouds and bathed my entire body in its warmth. And I could feel it penetrating through my winter jacket, through my prayer clothes, all the way down to my skin, and somehow even deeper, reaching places inside me I didn't know existed. At first I tried to maintain my prayer posture and continue reciting the familiar Arabic words I had spoken thousands of times before, but something was happening to my voice, to my ability to form the sounds that had always come so naturally. The Arabic syllables that usually flowed effortlessly from my lips began to stumble and catch in my throat. It was as if the very words themselves were becoming foreign to me, even though I had memorized them since childhood. The warmth from the light was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. It wasn't just physical heat warming my body on a cold morning. This warmth seemed to be emanating from somewhere deep within my chest and spreading outward through every fiber of my being. It felt like being embraced by pure love itself, held in arms that were infinitely strong yet infinitely gentle. As the sensation intensified, my hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I looked down at my palms, which I had placed on the prayer rug in the traditional Islamic position, and watched as they shook so violently that I could no longer maintain the proper prayer posture. The trembling wasn't from cold or fear, though I couldn't identify exactly what was causing it. It felt like my entire body was resonating with some kind of divine frequency that was too powerful for my physical form to contain. I tried desperately to regain my composure and continue my prayers, but the Arabic words that had always been my spiritual anchor now felt completely inadequate for what I was experiencing. Every time I attempted to recite Allahu Akbar or any other familiar phrase, the words would dissolve on my tongue before they could be spoken. It was as if my spirit was being prepared for an entirely different kind of communication, one that transcended human language altogether. The light seemed to be pulling me upward, not physically lifting me from the ground, but drawing my attention and my soul toward its source in the heavens. I felt an irresistible urge to look up, to find the origin of this supernatural illumination that was transforming everything about this ordinary Christmas morning. When I finally raised my eyes toward the sky, I gasped at what I saw. The golden light was streaming down in a perfect column, as focused and precise as a spotlight on a theater stage. But this wasn't artificial illumination created by human technology. This was something far beyond anything earthly minds could conceive or create. The light pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, and with each pulse I felt that incredible warmth surge through my body with renewed intensity. By now, my trembling had become so severe that I could no longer maintain any semblance of proper prayer position. My carefully folded legs gave way, and I found myself sitting back on my heels, staring up at this impossible display of divine power. The prayer rug beneath me, which had always been my sacred space for communion with Allah, now felt inadequate for the magnitude of what was happening. I became aware that I was no longer alone on that sidewalk. Through my peripheral vision, I could see that the Christmas service inside the church had paused. People were beginning to emerge from the building, drawn by the supernatural light that was illuminating the street outside the sanctuary. Some were pointing at the sky with expressions of awe and wonder. Others were covering their mouths with their hands, clearly shocked by what they were witnessing. An elderly woman with silver hair stepped out of the church doors and immediately fell to her knees on the front steps, her hands clasped in prayer. A young father lifted his small daughter onto his shoulders so she could get a better view of the miraculous light. Several teenagers pulled out their phones, but when they tried to capture what was happening, their cameras seemed unable to record the true brilliance of what we were all seeing. The pastor of the church, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples, emerged from the building and stood on the top step, looking directly at me with an expression I would never forget. It wasn't judgment or confusion or fear. It was recognition, as if he had been expecting this moment, as if he understood exactly what was taking place, even when I myself had no comprehension of it. More church members continued to gather, creating a semicircle around the front of the building. Their faces reflected the same awe I was feeling, but there was something else in their expressions too. Joy, pure, unrestrained joy, as if they were witnessing the fulfillment of promises they had been believing for their entire lives. The presence I felt in that light was becoming stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just illumination anymore. There was a consciousness within it, a personality, a love so vast and personal that it seemed to know every detail of my life, every struggle I had faced, every question I had wrestled with during those months of spiritual turmoil. This presence seemed to be waiting for something from me, patiently holding space for a response I wasn't yet ready to give. The trembling in my hands had spread throughout my entire body, and I realized I was crying, though I couldn't understand why tears were streaming down my cheeks. Then it happened. In the midst of that supernatural golden light, with my body trembling and tears streaming down my face, I heard a voice that would forever change the trajectory of my existence. This wasn't an audible voice that my ears could detect, nor was it the kind of internal dialogue that sometimes occurs in our own minds. This voice spoke directly into the deepest part of my soul, bypassing every physical and mental barrier to communicate with the very essence of who I was. Maz, the voice said, and hearing my name spoken with such infinite tenderness nearly overwhelmed me completely. I have been waiting for you. Come home to me. The moment I heard those words, every cell in my body seemed to recognize the speaker. This was the voice I had been hearing in my dreams for months, the presence I had felt during those quiet moments when warmth would suddenly embrace me for no apparent reason. But now, in this moment of divine encounter, there was no mistaking who was speaking. Every fiber of my being knew with absolute certainty that this was Jesus Christ, the Son of God, calling my name. The recognition hit me like a lightning bolt of pure truth. All my Islamic training had taught me that Jesus was merely a prophet, a good teacher, but certainly not the Son of God. The Quran I had memorized insisted that Allah had no son, that such claims were blasphemous. Yet here in this moment of undeniable divine encounter, my spirit recognized Jesus as Lord with a clarity that transcended every theological argument I had ever learned. The love in his voice was beyond anything human language could adequately describe. It wasn't the conditional love I had grown accustomed to, where acceptance was based on performance or obedience to religious rules. This was pure, unconditional love that knew every mistake I had ever made, Every sinful thought I had entertained, every moment of doubt and rebellion, yet embraced me completely anyway. I have been calling your name through your dreams, his voice continued, speaking directly to my heart. I have been drawing you to myself through your emptiness in prayer. The hunger you have felt, the longing for something more, that has been me preparing your heart to receive my love. In that instant, everything about my spiritual journey over the past months suddenly made perfect sense. The dreams that had disturbed my sleep, the growing emptiness I felt during Islamic prayers, the inexplicable pull I had felt toward this church building, it had all been orchestrated by Jesus himself. He had been pursuing me, wooing me, calling me into relationship with him even when I didn't understand what was happening. The weight of this revelation was staggering. I had spent my entire life believing I was serving God through Islam, performing the rituals, following the rules, trying to earn Allah's favor through my good deeds. But Jesus was revealing that he had been seeking me all along, that his love wasn't something I needed to earn, but something he freely offered. Do not be afraid, his voice whispered into my spirit. I know this challenges everything you have been taught. I know you are worried about your family, your community, your identity, but I am offering you something greater than religion, Mars. I am offering you relationship. I am offering you myself. The tears that had been trickling down my cheeks now became a torrent. 28 years of spiritual hunger, of trying to find satisfaction in religious performance, of feeling like I was never quite good enough, never quite faithful enough. All of that burden was being lifted from my shoulders in this single moment of encountering Jesus. But alongside the relief and joy, I was also experiencing profound shock and confusion. Everything I had been raised to believe was being challenged by this direct encounter with Christ. My Islamic worldview was crumbling in real time, replaced by a truth so beautiful and overwhelming that my mind could barely process it. You have been seeking Allah, Jesus continued, his voice filled with infinite compassion. But I am the way to the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. The God you have been searching for through Islamic prayers, you will find him through relationship with me. In that moment, I understood that all my prayers to Allah had actually been reaching Jesus because he is God. The Trinity that Christianity taught, which had always seemed impossible and confusing to my Islamic mind, suddenly became crystal clear through this personal revelation. Jesus wasn't just a pathway to God, he was God manifesting his love directly to me on this Christmas morning. The golden light seemed to pulse with each word he spoke, as if creation itself was responding to the voice of its creator. I could sense the church members gathered around me were witnessing something extraordinary, though I wasn't sure if they could hear his voice the way I was hearing it. Will you follow me? Jesus asked. And I could hear both invitation and patience in his tone. He wasn't demanding an immediate response or threatening consequences if I refused. He was simply offering himself to me, allowing me the freedom to choose. In that moment, all my intellectual objections, all my concerns about family and community, all my fears about abandoning the religion of my childhood became secondary to one overwhelming reality. I was in the presence of truth himself, and that truth was offering me life, real life, abundant life that my soul had been craving without even knowing what it was seeking. Yes, I whispered, the word emerging from the deepest place in my heart. Yes, Jesus, I want to follow you. The moment I spoke those words, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere around me. The light seemed to intensify briefly, then began to gradually soften. But the presence, that incredible sense of being completely known and completely loved, remained strong within my heart. I looked up to see the pastor approaching me slowly, his face radiant with joy and understanding. He knelt down beside my prayer rug, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Brother, he said softly, I believe Jesus just spoke to your heart. Through my tears, I nodded, unable to form coherent words to describe what I had just experienced. I managed to whisper, I think Jesus just called my name. The pastor's gentle smile and kind eyes were exactly what my overwhelmed heart needed in that moment. Here was a complete stranger who somehow understood the magnitude of what had just happened to me, even though I could barely comprehend it myself. As he knelt beside me on the sidewalk, I could see that he wasn't surprised by this divine encounter. There was a knowing in his expression that suggested he had been praying for moments exactly like this. Would you like to come inside? He asked, his voice carrying the same warmth I had heard in Jesus' voice just moments before. We're celebrating the birth of our Savior this morning, and I think you might find that what you've just experienced is exactly what Christmas is all about. I looked down at my prayer rug spread out on the concrete sidewalk, the physical symbol of everything I had believed about worship and faith for my entire life. Just an hour ago, this rug had represented my connection to Allah, my Islamic identity, my spiritual anchor in an uncertain world. Now it felt like a bridge between my old life and whatever was about to begin. With trembling hands, I slowly rolled up the prayer rug, knowing somehow that I would never use it for Islamic prayers again. As I stood to my feet, my legs were still shaky from the intensity of the encounter I had just experienced. The pastor steadied me with a gentle touch on my arm, and I was struck by how natural it felt to accept help from this Christian leader who had been a complete stranger just moments before. "I don't understand what just happened to me," I admitted to him, my voice barely above a whisper. "I came here to pray to Allah, and I think Jesus just spoke directly to my heart." The pastor's eyes filled with tears of joy. "That's exactly what happened, my friend. Jesus has been pursuing you, calling you to himself, and you've just responded to his invitation. This is the most beautiful Christmas gift our congregation could ever witness." As we walked toward the church entrance, I was acutely aware of the congregation members who had gathered outside during my supernatural encounter. Their faces reflected a mixture of awe, joy, and reverence. Some of the older women had tears streaming down their cheeks. Several men removed their hats as I passed, as if they were witnessing something sacred. A group of teenagers looked at me with wide-eyed wonder, clearly understanding that they had just witnessed a genuine miracle. "We've been praying for our Muslim neighbors for years," one elderly gentleman said as I walked past him. "We never imagined God would answer our prayers so dramatically right here on our church steps." Walking into the sanctuary felt like entering an entirely different world. The warm glow of hundreds of candles created an atmosphere of peace and reverence that seemed to envelop me like a gentle embrace. The same voices I had heard from outside were now surrounding me, but instead of feeling foreign and unfamiliar, their Christmas hymns felt like a homecoming song welcoming me into a family I never knew I belonged to. The pastor guided me to a seat in the back pew, understanding instinctively that I might need some space to process everything that was happening. As I sat down, I was overwhelmed by how perfectly I seemed to fit into this environment that should have felt completely alien to someone raised in Islamic tradition. The congregation was in the middle of singing Silent Night, and as their voices rose together in worship, I felt that same supernatural presence I had experienced outside. Jesus was here in this place among these people, and somehow he was making it clear that I belonged here too. I found myself mouthing the words to songs I had never heard before, yet somehow my heart knew the melodies. When they sang about Jesus being born in Bethlehem, about God becoming flesh to dwell among humanity, about the Savior coming to seek and save the lost, every word resonated with my soul like truth I had always known but never been able to articulate. The pastor returned to the pulpit to continue his Christmas sermon, and it felt as though every word he spoke was directed specifically at me. He talked about how Jesus came not just for those who were already religious, but for those who were searching, seeking, wandering in spiritual darkness. He described how God's love breaks down barriers of culture, religion, and tradition to reach hearts that are hungry for truth. Sometimes, the pastor said, looking directly at me with a knowing smile, God shows up in ways we never expect, in places we never imagined, to people who thought they were beyond his reach. That's the beauty of Christmas. God comes to us wherever we are, whatever our background, whatever we believe about ourselves. As the service continued, I felt waves of emotion washing over me that I couldn't fully understand or control. Joy, relief, gratitude, awe, and yes, even fear about what this transformation would mean for my relationships and my future. But underneath all the complex emotions was a peace that seemed to anchor my soul in a way I had never experienced. When the pastor asked the congregation to bow their heads for prayer, I felt the Holy Spirit prompting me to do something that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. During his prayer, when he asked if anyone wanted to publicly surrender their life to Jesus Christ, I felt an irresistible compulsion to stand up. My legs were shaking as I rose from the back pew, but there was a strength flowing through me that wasn't my own. The entire congregation turned to look at me, but instead of feeling embarrassed or self-conscious, I felt embraced by their love and acceptance. "I want to give my life to Jesus," I announced, my voice carrying more clearly than I expected. "I came here as a Muslim, but Jesus has called my name and I want to follow him." The sanctuary erupted in quiet celebration, with people wiping tears from their eyes and whispering prayers of thanksgiving. The pastor invited me to come to the front of the church, and as I walked down that aisle on Christmas morning, I knew I was walking toward a completely new life. Standing at the front of Grace Community Church, surrounded by 200 strangers who felt more like family than I had ever experienced. I prayed the sinner's prayer with the pastor guiding me through each word. As I confessed my sins and invited Jesus Christ to be Lord of my life, I felt chains breaking off my soul that I didn't even know had been binding me. The emptiness that had plagued my Islamic prayers for months was instantly filled with a peace that surpassed all understanding. But the joy of that Christmas morning conversion was only the beginning of a journey that would test every aspect of my faith, my relationships, and my identity. When I finally made it home that afternoon, still glowing with the supernatural encounter I had experienced, I knew I had to tell my family what had happened. The conversation with my parents was the most difficult discussion of my entire life. My father's reaction was immediate and explosive. "You have betrayed everything we taught you," he shouted, his face red with anger and disbelief. "You have dishonored our family name, our heritage, our faith. How could you abandon Islam for the religion of the oppressors?" My mother simply wept, unable to speak through her tears of what she perceived as devastating loss. For 3 agonizing months, my parents refused to speak to me. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages were ignored. When I tried to visit their home, the door remained locked, and I could hear my mother crying inside while my father told neighbors that their son had died to them. The cultural shame of having a child convert from Islam to Christianity was more than they could bear. The rejection from my family was matched by abandonment from many friends in the Muslim community who had been part of my life since childhood. Ahmed, who had been my closest friend since we were teenagers, told me I was no longer welcome in his home. Fatima, who I had once considered marrying, blocked my phone number and told mutual friends that I had become a traitor to our people. "You've been brainwashed by Christian missionaries," my former imam declared when word of my conversion reached the mosque. "You are no longer welcome in this sacred place. You have chosen the path of the deceived, and we can no longer consider you our brother." The loneliness during those first months was almost unbearable. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The cost of following Jesus seemed overwhelming when measured against the relationships I had lost, the cultural identity I had abandoned, and the family ties that appeared to be severed forever. But even in the darkest moments of isolation and rejection, the peace I had received that Christmas morning never left me. When I opened my Bible each day, I encountered the same Jesus who had called my name outside the church. When I prayed, instead of the emptiness I had felt as a Muslim, I experienced intimate conversation with a God who knew me personally and loved me unconditionally. 3 months after my conversion, something miraculous happened. My mother called me, her voice hesitant but filled with curiosity. "I've been watching you," she said. "Even though we haven't spoken, I've been observing from a distance. There's something different about you, something peaceful. I want to understand what has happened to my son." That phone call led to a tearful reunion where I was able to share my testimony with my parents. While they didn't immediately convert to Christianity, they began to see that my faith had produced good fruit in my life. The anger and bitterness that had sometimes characterized my personality had been replaced with gentleness and joy. My father's acceptance took longer, but gradually he began to acknowledge that the Jesus I served had made me a better man than I had been as a Muslim. "I don't understand your religion," he told me 6 months after my conversion, "but I cannot deny that you have found something real and life-changing." The transformation in my daily life was undeniable to everyone around me. The chronic worry and anxiety that had plagued me for years vanished completely, replaced by confidence in God's love and provision. The guilt and shame that had driven me to religious performance were erased by the grace of Christ. The fear of death that had sometimes kept me awake at night was conquered by the assurance of eternal life. 3 months after my encounter with Jesus, I was baptized in the same church where he had first called my name. As Pastor Williams lowered me into the baptismal waters and raised me up again, I felt like I was being publicly declared as God's beloved son. The congregation erupted in celebration, welcoming me officially into the family of believers. Today, as I share my testimony with you, I can honestly say that following Jesus has been the greatest decision of my entire life. The peace that filled the emptiness in my Islamic prayers has never left me. The joy I experienced that Christmas morning has only deepened with time. The love I encountered in Christ's voice continues to sustain me through every challenge and trial. Look inside your own heart right now and ask yourself this question. Is there an emptiness in your life that no amount of religious activity, good works, or moral behavior has been able to fill? That emptiness exists because you were created for relationship with Jesus Christ. No other religion, philosophy, or belief system can satisfy the hunger of your soul because you were made by Him and for Him. I spent 28 years as a devout Muslim, performing every ritual, following every rule, trying desperately to earn God's favor through my own efforts. But I never found the peace and satisfaction that came to me in an instant when I surrendered my life to Jesus. The difference between Islam and Christianity isn't just theological, it's personal, relational, transformational. If a devout Muslim praying outside a church on Christmas morning can encounter the living Christ, then anyone can. Jesus is still calling names today, still breaking through religious barriers, still transforming hearts that are open to his love. Don't wait for a dramatic supernatural intervention like I experienced. He's calling your name right now through the words of this testimony. This is my story. Jesus shocked everyone that Christmas morning, especially me, when he called a Muslim man into relationship with himself. But the real shock isn't that God would reach someone like me. The real shock would be if you heard this testimony and didn't respond to his love, calling your own name today.